We're going to talk about death work. We're going to talk about ancestor veneration. We're going to talk about death. Hey friends, it's Jasmine, and I hope that you all are doing well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I am a witchy content creator of sorts. So if you're into things like witchcraft, folklore, paganism, or just the general weird, then check out my links down below in the description. And if you are a returning subscriber, it's good to see you back. Let's get into today's video. I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer here in the sense that this is going to be a longer video for sure. So if you want to grab a snack or a drink, feel free to do so. Buckle in. You can listen to this as a podcast. You don't have to watch me if you don't necessarily want to, but yeah, this is going to be a longer style video, and we're going to be talking about something that's been highly requested of me to talk about again, and that is necromancy. In this video, I'm going to be covering a lot that can kind of relate to the topic of necromancy. We're going to be talking about ancestor veneration, the red soul, cemeteries, graveyards, proper etiquette. And I want you to keep in mind throughout listening or watching this video that everything that I am saying in this video is from A, my own practice and experiences, and B, from a American traditional folkloric witches sort of perspective in general. Now, that being said, if you were to take multiple American traditional folkloric witches and put them in a room together and ask them the same question, there'd probably still be some nuances on personal practice, but within the tradition, there is sort of like general policies, rules, and guidelines that we follow. No way does that mean that you have to. So if there are things in this video that you would not do, don't do them. We'll also be going into like the how, what, when, where, and why of all the things, okay? And if you have questions, feel free to comment them down below. I would love to see some discourse and dialogue going on down in the comment section. And if I need to do like an extended video off of this one, I totally will. I love talking about witchcraft. I have always really been attracted to what mainstream kind of considers as the perverse, the weird, or the taboo. And witchcraft very much falls in line with that narrative. Death work, necromancy, spirits, and the dead is something that I've also really always been drawn to ever since I really can remember. You know, it's
not just a phase, Mom.
I have made some videos here on my channel sort of exploring death work and my relationship with it as a devotee of the Dark Mother. And on my channel, you can find those videos if you are interested. And also, I do have my laptop here literally right next to me. So if you see me like looking down during this video, I'm not necessarily reading from a script, as this is not going to be a scripted video, but I do have some bullet points of like things I want to make sure that I touch on. So if you see some weird light, that's coming from my laptop. If you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. Also, I am very neurospicy, so I tend to just sometimes kind of look around and about. Okay, so to start with, I think we should define necromancy. And the Oxford Dictionary definition: necromancy is defined as the practice of communicating with the spirits of the dead, especially in order to predict the future or gain hidden knowledge. It is often associated with sorcery and black magic. Okay, now, here's my thing, right? That is the Oxford Dictionary definition. And I believe that definition to be true and valid for many people. However, as a witch, I have thoughts on that definition. I've made some videos on my channel talking about sorcery. If you're interested in hearing sort of some of my opinions and my take about witchcraft versus sorcery and how they are similar and how they are different, I will try to remember to link that video down below in the description. Also, I have talked numerous times in different videos on my channel about how I feel about the terminology black magic, right? And the nuances and the complications that I think that come along with using this terminology. And in this video, the reason why I wanted to start with defining the terms that we are using is because I think it's important to have that dialogue and that understanding in communication. And I think what a lot of people are suggesting when they use the mainstream phrase of black magic is they're referring to ill intentions. They're referring to malevolence. So I tend to just use the term malefica. And also, if you're new here, if you're not familiar with me, I have no problem with that either. And I've made videos in relation to that on my channel as well. So if you hear me refer to malefica, that's probably what maybe some people's definition of black magic is. Now, another popular definition within the witching world of the dark arts or black magic is also working with the unseen. And that mainstream takeaway I could totally get behind, because when we are working with spirits, we are working with the seen and the unseen in the in-between. And I know also that there are some people that hear the terminology like necromancy or necromancer. And if you're anything like me and you're a little bit nerdy, you might also think of like World of Warcraft, Dungeons and Dragons, the Lich King. You might think of more pop culture sort of references as opposed to like super serious, academic, astute occultism. However, that is just, there's a blend. There's a blend here. And so when we're talking about necromancy and modern witchcraft, we are talking about a witch's relationship with the dead and the practices that involve that. And that's what we're getting into in this video. I know that this intro has been very long-winded, but that's what we are going to be discussing, is working with the dead. How, what, when, where, why. I was making my document and kind of putting some bullet points of things that I wanted to make sure that I covered and went over. The very first thing that I put on my list was ancestor veneration. Now, ancestor veneration is first up here on the list because this would be, in a way, one of our closest links to the unseen realm. This would be one of our closest links to the necromantic arts. And I know that ancestor veneration really deserves its whole own video. And I do get a lot of questions in regards to ancestor work and how to approach it and what it looks like. And this video is not going to solely be dedicated to ancestor work, but I wanted to bring it up and mention it because we are talking about the dead. We are talking about necromancy. So if you'd like to see me do a video focusing more exclusively on ancestor veneration, feel free to let me know. I do have some videos here on my channel where I have shared some of my own ancestral healing journey and my ancestral practice, if you are interested. Now, as a modern witch, we kind of split ancestor up into a couple different categories. So we have our mighty dead, which the mighty dead are the witches who have come before us. So we might think of witches like Gerald Gardner. We might think of witches like Doreen Valiente, like David Chumbley, like Robert Cochrane. Okay, there's a whole list of witches. Sybil Leek, right? There's a ton of influential witches of the past who have basically walked so that we could run. Like them or leave them. That's a fact. And I'm not saying that I'm like, you know, a fangirl of every single witch from the past, just like I'm not a fan of some of you today. That was shady. Anyway, there's also our beloved dead, okay? And our beloved dead, those are our ancestors. Those are our literal bloodline. Our mighty dead and our beloved dead is what makes up this sort of concept that we refer to as the red soul, as part of our three-soul paradigm, the red, the white, and the black. Our red soul is our connection to magic via the witches of the past and our ancestors, our ancestral lines that runs through our blood, through our red. It runs to and through. So as I am currently recording this video, we are just approaching the autumnal equinox. And I've made a video about that. I believe it is the hashtag light and dark, where we sort of dissect the light and the dark half of the year and a bunch of narratives surrounding the fall and spring equinox if you are interested. I mention when I am filming this because all of my videos go onto my Patreon first for early release. And there is a link down below in the description for that as well. All of your support really does mean the world to me, and it keeps me being able to make this style of content. That being said, I probably will be releasing this video sometime during October or the season of the dead. And to me, the season of the dead and the season of the witch are two seasons that kind of coincide with each other. The season of the witch, for me, starts on the fall equinox and ends around early November. The season of the dead is the month of October. And during the month of October, tying this back to ancestor veneration, a lot of witches, not all, but witches like myself, we will set up an altar for the dead. Now, I do keep an ancestor altar up year-round as well, and that one is much more close and intimate with people that I have had in my life that I have been very close to and that I have lost. And it's a smaller altar that literally exists on top one of these bookshelves. It is a shrine. It is a living memory of my love and my connection to my beloved dead. However, during the month of October, my ancestor altar really takes over about probably a fourth of my living room. And on the altar, I have beloved dead, I have mighty dead. I also include witches from lore as well, like folkloric witches. And on that altar, there will be pitchers, and there will typically be some sort of container of water and an offering plate. If I have them, I will also have tag locks or items that are connected to the people that are on that altar to sort of tie that energy into the ancestral altar. And if you're interested in hearing my thoughts about an ancestor altar, maybe I can make that into a whole ancestral veneration video. Like I said, it really deserves its own video. This video, since we're talking about necromancy, one of the first and best places, in my opinion, to start as a beginner necromancer is to connect with your own dead, connect with your own blood. Your spirits are already there with you. They are already connected to you via your blood. So in my opinion, that would be the most natural place to start. Not only can there be spirits that are connected to you through your ancestry, through your cultural heritage, through initiatory traditions that you can be connected to, but there are also items that can be connected to spirits as well. As American folkloric traditional witches, we would tend to refer to this as like a Kuthun. A Kuthun is an item that is tied to a person's sort of energy and essence. I think for a lot of us modern witches, our Book of Shadows could very much serve as a Kuthun. What is going to happen to your Book of Shadows when you pass away? Whose hands is your Book of Shadows going to fall in? Cuthuns also do not have to be magical grimoires of sorts. I have a Kuthun that is deeply connected with my mother that is in no way related really to what most people would think of when they think of sorcery or witchcraft. And in fact, it's a very everyday object. And look, I totally understand that maybe not everyone feels like they have a Kuthun. When I was first coming into the American folkloric traditional witchcraft sort of current, I wasn't even sure if I had one. And as I continued in my practice, I started realizing, oh wait, no, that's actually very much a Kuthun. And you can also sort of imbue a Kuthun as well by taking an object and consecrating it in a cemetery or a graveyard to connect it to an individual, even after death. And that is going to take me actually to my next topic, which is talking about the difference between cemeteries and graveyards. Now, this is very much something that is kind of interchangeable. I know that a lot of people will use either terminology, and it's very, very common, but there is actually a difference. Typically, a cemetery is more secular, whereas a graveyard is connected to or ran by a church. So, cemeteries and graveyards. Graveyards are usually located on or near a church, while cemeteries are more common in like neighborhoods or metropolitan areas. However, the two terms are often used interchangeably, and there are no size requirements that mark either one. Some main differences between cemetery and graveyards, I think first start again with the origin of the word. So the origin of the word graveyard can come from Proto-Germanic words like graben, meaning to dig, and garden, which refers to an enclosed area of land. The word cemetery comes from the Greek word kiametrion, which means a dormitory or resting place. Now, in history, during the Middle Ages, wealthy Christians were often buried in crypts beneath churches, whereas less wealthy congregants were buried in the churchyard, thus becoming known as a graveyard. And of course, the people that were not connected to the church, disowned or exiled by the church, or not sanctioned by the church, would have been thrown into paupers' graves or would have been outside of the boundary line of the graveyard. And there's a lot of superstition and cultural narratives that play into that, like having a heathenous pagan or, you know, a non-believer buried next to the children of God could somehow soil the land. And that's just crazy. In a lot of traditional folkloric witch lore, you are going to find spells and stories that are highly associated with sort of subversive acts in a graveyard. And that is because graveyards are connected to church and to a congregation and to an organized system of religion. And in stories, there is even the tales of like the Black Baptism, where dirt from a graveyard is taken, put on a silver platter, and the witch stands against the current in a moving body of water and anoints herself in the dirt of the graveyard, says the Lord's Prayer backwards during a full moon. And this is sort of a superstitious folkloric tale that is told to sort of point at the subversive nature of witches. And I think that that's just beautiful. Cemeteries, you're also usually going to have some common different sections. Regardless as to like what cemetery you go to, you're probably going to find a veterans area. Sometimes you'll find a Masonic area. Sometimes you'll find like a children's area. I also think it's important to point out that I do live in the Midwest in the United States, and I'm aware that there are cultural nuances surrounding burial rites for our species. So if your mileage varies here, I'm not trying to present myself as the be-all end-all on burials and death. A lot of our cemeteries, it's also pretty common for us to have what's called scattering areas or ash gardens, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's where the cremations of past loved ones are spread in a garden. And it becomes sort of like a memory garden. Entranceway into a cemetery or graveyard is inherently a very liminal space. Any crossroads where three roads meet is also a very important and liminal space. I definitely think that as trad witches, it is important for us to build our necromantic practice, because working with spirits is so heavily connected with this tradition. As trad witches, it's important for us to build our muscles and our necromantic arts because the dead have a lot to offer. If you do not already have a connection to a cemetery, consider this to be your sign to maybe start connecting and exploring the cemetery that is closest to where you reside. The cemetery that is closest to you, you can build a special connection with, even if you don't have any beloved dead buried there. And the reason why is, as trad witches, our relationship with the land, whatever land it is that we are residing on, wherever in the world you are, our relationship with the land is paramount to our practice. And the people that are buried in the cemetery closest to you have lived and died on this land before you even got there. My first recommendations would be to research the actual cemetery itself. When was the first person buried there? Who are they? What information can you find out about them? Don't be afraid to use websites like Find a Grave or Ancestry, or even like the Mormon database is insane for finding genealogy records. Also, birth, death, and marriage records, at least where I live, are considered to be public knowledge. It might be a little bit difficult to dig up depending on how old it is, and sometimes they are sort of gate-kept behind county records, but it is possible. There's also a narrative regarding the first person to be buried in that cemetery and why they have a special importance in necromancy. And in some traditions and practices, the person who is buried there first is seen sort of as the keeper of the space. And so by building your connection with them, you are building a connection with the place. By connecting with the people buried in the land closest to you, you are also connecting with the wider genus loci, or the spirit of the place that you reside. They are part of that as well. As far as lore surrounding the keeper of the space, there are also spirits that are thought to be sort of reapers or guardians. I refer to one in my book, Ambrosia's Book of Witchflight, and my second book, Ambrosia's Book of Spirits, not to just throw in some shameless self-promo here, but I go into depth about my recognition of the Grave Guardian and what this looks like and what correspondences I associate with this spirit. To me, the Grave Guardian is a sentient spirit that is a protector and a keeper of the space. They are a manifestation, almost egregore-like, if you will, for lack of a better analogy, of the mourning and the dead and the peace of the cemetery. And for those of you who have done work, and I don't mean just walking in the cemetery, though it could include that, but I mean those of you that have gone into a cemetery as a witch with a capital W, you know sometimes when you feel the eyes of the Grave Guardian upon you. And sometimes it can feel threatening. Sometimes it can feel heavy. Sometimes it's not the Grave Guardian and it could be another wandering dead spirit. However, the Grave Guardian is a protector. And so that sort of like pins and needles feeling or like goose flesh feeling is very much associated with the Grave Guardian. You may have also been in a cemetery and just had the sudden feeling that it's time to leave. In my opinion, that is also the Grave Guardian sort of giving you that nudge to be like, it's time for you to go, girl. In my practice, when I am working with a cemetery and when I am going to a cemetery with the intention to do work, with the intention to practice necromancy, harvesting dirt, be that connecting with one of the dead, be that practicing divination or doing work, like a working in the cemetery, it's really important to also come with offerings for the keeper, for the Grave Guardian. And honestly, it doesn't have to be super crazy and elaborate. On your way to the cemetery, stop at a gas station, pick up some water. Water is a very traditional offering. A, for the dead. There's that quote, the dead are always thirsty. B, it's pretty universal amongst people and cultures. We all drink water, or we should. Have you had your water today? You better go get you some. Go get you a glass of water. And C, I think it also makes for a great offering for the grave guardian. Water is also a conduit, and as an element, it is heavily associated with the West and with the land of the dead, with the underworld. Water is often thought to also be a portal, a way to open a gate to the underworld. So by entering the cemetery and pouring out some water with intent, you are making that offering and you are opening a gateway to the dead and recognizing and paying respects to the keeper, the grave guardian. And by having that sort of good relation with that spirit, you will ensure safe travels and protection while in the cemetery by keeping your relationship up to par and making good offerings. You will also ensure that nothing will leave and follow with you home. Because here's the thing that I think sometimes is forgotten when we're talking about the dead. The dead are just like us. Okay, they're just dead. And with people, there are good and bad and people in between that fall in a moral ambiguity. That's how it is. So just because this is a deceased spirit does not mean that it has your best interest or gives a shit about you, if I'm being frank, which is hard for me to do because I'm actually Jasmyne. Other good popular offerings, not just for the grave guardian, but also for potential other spirits that you may opt to work with in your necromantic practice, would be things like tobacco, alcohol like rums or whiskeys, rice, coins. Coins make really good offerings, and at least here in the States, we have a ton of lore around coins and them being used as offerings. And different coins like dimes, pennies, nickels, quarters, representing different things. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. I will touch back on that throughout this video. So I would say, to kind of do a little bit of a recap here, that as trad witches, it is wise for us to build a relationship with the beloved dead, or mighty dead sometimes, that are residing in the cemetery closest to our residence. Because by honoring the dead and working with the dead of our land, we are also honoring the land. And with that also comes knowledge and power and research, because when you are connecting with a cemetery, sometimes necromancy could look like sorting through obituaries and old newspaper articles that we uncover online, going to your library and accessing death records and birth records and marriage records, or your county clerk's office. It could also look like trying to find images of people online and piece trees and family lines together. Necromancy is not always, you know, a witch adorned in a big black hooded robe with chalkwork sigils at the crossroads, like, and candles
and smoke and mirrors and bats and ghouls and goblins. Like,
sometimes it's also just sitting at your computer and doing the work in the digital, so that way you will be more prepared when you do the work in the physical and the astral later. Okay, but that research is paramount. And aside from the cemetery that is closest to you, having a connection to an ancestral area, be it a whole cemetery that's connected to your ancestral line, or having a section or family plots, that's another access point of power that serves something very different than the cemetery that is closest to you. The cemetery closest to you is helping you connect with the genus loci, is helping you connect with the land that you reside on. Your ancestral cemetery or family plots that you can connect with, that is connecting you back again to your blood and back again to your red soul. And there is that phrase in these necromantic arts that is blood calls to blood. Your ancestors are already with you and possibly already calling to you. And I know that a lot of witches sometimes can feel kind of weird about working with ancestors, especially if our most recent deceased were not practitioners of the craft themselves, or were even possibly like vehemently against it. But here's the thing, you don't have to work with them. You have other ancestors. Do you know that every generation you go back on your biological parent's side, things double? Because you have 2 parents, you have 4 grandparents, and so forth and so forth. Like the pyramid keeps getting bigger as you go back in time. You will be able to find someone out there in your ancestral line that you can find inspiration from and that you can connect with if you're willing to put in that work. If you're willing to open that door to allow that spirit to come through, they will. They may have already. Just the fact that you are watching this video could potentially be an indicator. I mean, I do think that there is magic in the algorithms. In talking about cemeteries, and as a Midwest witch here in Indianapolis, I have to talk about one of the crown jewels of our state capital, and that would be Crown Hill Cemetery. Crown Hill is the final resting place of President Benjamin Harrison, poet James Whitcomb Riley, and Eli Lilly, 3 U.S. vice presidents, 11 Indiana governors, and numerous other political, business, and cultural leaders, as well as the many heroes we honor with these events, both in public safety and in armed forces. Lucy Ann Seton, the wife of the Civil War Union Captain John Seton, became the first internment on June 2nd, 1864, one day following the cemetery's dedication. And 2 years later, federal authorities requested a portion of Crown Hill Cemetery to be set aside for the Civil War internments. And here's a fun fact about Indiana. And it's not often that I brag about my state because, trust, there are tons of horrific things in our history. But when it comes to the Civil War, and when it comes to fighting against the enslavement of human beings, Indiana, the 19th state of 50, contributed the 2nd most amount of troops and had one of the lowest state populations at the time. Also, Crown Hill Cemetery is noted as the 4th largest cemetery in the United States. Crown Hill Cemetery is also listed as one of the top 10 places to see in Indianapolis. And some of you might be thinking like a cemetery as like a destination, like that's kind of odd. Crown Hill is also viewed as an art park. People go picnicking there. People ride their bikes through there. And like I've mentioned, there is tons of history there. It's a beautiful space to walk through. So now I'm gonna move into like the cemetery etiquette portion of this video. We've already talked about offerings a little bit already in terms of bringing up like the grave guardian and common offerings that I would associate with necromancy that are, I would say, fairly general across the board. I mean, obviously there's going to be nuance given individual circumstances and what spirits specifically we are working with, but water is pretty universal. Tobacco, liquor, rice, coins, all of those things, pretty common universal offerings. And back to ancestor work again, if you know that your uncle loved chocolate cake, a slice of chocolate cake could also be a wonderful offering for your uncle. If you are honoring a spirit that you did not know in life and you haven't really been able to dig into their background online through your own research, you can also use divination to have them guide your hand on what other suitable offerings might be good for them. Aside from making an offering upon entrance into the cemetery, another thing that I practice and that many witches of our tradition practice is veiling. So veiling can look like a couple different things, and it really depends on your personal preference. But the general concept is by wearing something as a head covering when you enter the cemetery. And this is worn for a couple of different reasons. It is worn, one, as a mark of respect. for the dead. It is worn to signify the shift in your perspective, because by putting that veil on, you are putting yourself into the headspace to do that work. You are not going to wear your necromancy veil as part of your everyday apparel. Your veil should be something that is specifically worn when you are doing this sort of craft. It also serves as like a protective shield on your crown, on your head, which is where there is some belief that that is sometimes where spirits can enter for possessory work. And if that is something that you are looking to avoid, then I would recommend you veil. It's very common to veil with scarves. It's also very common to veil with hats. Also met other modern witches who have veiled with wigs. Your relationship to veiling is completely your own, and I cannot tell you what is most appropriate for you and your practice. I'm just sharing the information and the experience that I have. So do with that as you will. When you are going into the cemetery or graveyard to do work, not only should you have some offerings prepared and a veil packed, you might just want to have a whole witch on the go bag, something that you can just quickly throw into your trunk that's going to have some of these items I am mentioning, such as a bottle of water, a little pouch of rice, a little baggie of coins, maybe a handkerchief or a headscarf. Also, another thing that you could put in there is some divination tools. Tarot cards, of course, as a tarot reader, are one of my favorites. I love the Rider-Waite-Smith system of divination. I find it to be very clear, but also there are other ways and modalities. So maybe think about packing more than one. Dowsing rods, oracle cards, pendulums, runes, bones, whatever it is that you feel called to. I've even used just playing cards. Packing some divination supplies in your necromancy bag or your witch on the go bag is wise, because that's going to create a conduit for you to connect with the spirits. You may also want to think about packing maybe a notebook and a pen so you can write and journal, or practice some automatic writing if you are looking to get into some possessory work. When it comes to what divination tools you want to bring with you, I can't tell you which ones to bring. You need to connect with your own psychic abilities, your own channeling powers, and find the tools that work for you, right? So I can't tell you necessarily which ones to bring, but all of those would be really good suggestions to put in your bag. Now, while you are there, you may also think about doing some work. If it is your first or second or even third time at the place, I personally don't know if I would recommend that. You would want to consort with your divination in order to determine what is going to be appropriate for you. But there are several curios that I can think of that you can acquire through doing work in the cemetery. So we have graveyard dirt or cemetery dirt, and this would simply just be dirt, allegedly and for entertainment purposes only, collected within that space. You want to make sure that you are always mindful and you are always careful about trespassing laws. A lot of our cemeteries here in the United States are technically closed at night. So they are closed from dusk and they reopen at dawn. And if you are found in the cemetery at night, there can be legal repercussions. If you are found taking gravestone etchings, where you put the paper on the gravestone and some chalk and you take an etching, you can technically face legal repercussions. Even doing simple things that might have the best of intentions, like cleaning a grave, wiping it down with some water, can be seen as desecration. And so you want to be careful always when you are doing work in the cemetery. Be mindful of your surroundings. And I'm not condoning, endorsing, or creating any sort of narrative that I'm giving permission to do any of those things, because I can't, and the law is the law. But if you're going to be bad, at least be good at it, and you need to be smart. There is dirt that can be taken from the wider cemetery itself. So not from a specific grave, but just dirt taken from, you know, right off of the trail, right off of that gravel road. That is going to connect with the space sort of overall. You could even see that as a connection specifically with the grave guardian or the keeper. You can bring that dirt home and incorporate it into your work from home, your spells from home, your mojo bags or whatever it might be. You can put it into spell jars. I mean, the possibilities for what you can do with it are kind of limitless. Of course, there's also taking the dirt from a grave. And I do think that there's some caveats with that as well. You should probably have some sort of established relationship with that spirit and confirmed permission from that spirit via divination before taking dirt from their grave. That's what I would recommend. And I feel like that's pretty much like kind of common sense, but I have seen and heard of witches just kind of collecting dirt almost as if it's Pokemon. And I think that that's so incredibly disrespectful to the dead, because they're not just a curio. These were living, breathing people that were someone's sister, mother, wife, daughter, brother, son, uncle, what have you. This was someone's child. You know what I mean? Like, have some respect. Mentioned earlier in this video, dirt from the crossroads and dirt from the entranceway, and both of those styles of dirt being connected with, you know, opening the gates and liminality and fate. And I think that those dirts can serve different purposes, but are sort of related. There's also like working with specific spirits because of their occupation. So like if you have a court case or a legal working, maybe working with a deceased lawyer and building that relationship there and making good offerings in exchange for their dirt and their help in the case could be something to consider. This also applies to like medical professionals for situations that might involve medical sort of related workings. Also want to caveat this in the sense that like I am not a medical, legal, or financial advisor, okay? So do not come to me for medical, legal, or financial advice because I am not licensed to do so. But what I am is a witch. And so what I can do is give you my personal opinion based off of my practice and the tradition that I am trained and training in. I think it makes perfect sense to, you know, go to the grave of a banker or go to the grave of a lawyer or a doctor to acquire dirt and build a relationship with that spirit in order to make a good pact for a specific type of working that might involve those things. Something just to consider. And if you're doing your work surrounding that cemetery and doing your research, I'm sure you're going to uncover those people that could have occupations that they practice in life that they could serve you in death with. Of course, in exchange for good offering. You should never just be, you know, demanding that a spirit help you with XYZ. Honestly, they'd probably just laugh at you. Spirits are not here to completely just be at your every beckoning call. You are not a lich, no matter how hard you might try. At the end of the day, you are a witch, not a lich. Another common question I get is, Jasmine, like, how do I connect with a spirit in a cemetery? Like, I feel called to a particular spirit, but how do I work with them? Again, do your research. Look into that particular spirit, find out some of their information. A lot of graves are going to have birth, death, and legal names clearly on the grave, and you can do a lot with that information. But also be mindful that this is someone's potential relative, right? That could still very much be living. So just be mindful of that. I know that I'm kind of weirded out if I found out that like someone who I didn't even know, who my mother didn't even know, was like working with my mom's burial place. Like that would be kind of odd to me, especially because she's not buried. But anyway. Also have kind of a ritual suggestion for you to try should you be open to it. And this is kind of how to find a familiar spirit ally in the cemetery. This ritual is not completely unique to me, but basically what you do, aside from the things I've already mentioned, like making good offerings to the grave guardian keeper, like veiling, like packing offerings and divination tools with you, is remember those coins that I had referenced earlier that you should have in your Witch on the Go bag. You can take 3 pennies, and the reason for pennies is because they're copper, and that copper is this conduit, right? So when you have the copper, you take the 3 pennies, you throw them over your left shoulder. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back a little bit. So you go into the cemetery and you follow your heart. As cheesy and corny as that sounds, if you are veiled and prepared, and if you are in that cemetery, maybe alone even, because going to do that work alone is going to be very different than going with a friend or going with a group. And sometimes going alone can be even more intense, and that's a good thing. The dead will always speak to those that have ears that can hear. That's how spirits operate. And having a bunch of outside noise and chatter and distractions is not going to help you hear. And sometimes you can also hear them with your heart. And I know that sounds corny and I know that sounds cheesy, but you follow that sort of heart sound to a place that calls you in the cemetery. And maybe some of you have already had this sort of experience. There's a reason why they call the craft sometimes the mysteries, and that's because there are things that we cannot put into words to explain the experiences. They have to only be experienced, and it's not that me or anyone else is trying to gatekeep that. It's that there literally aren't words for the ecstasy of ritual sometimes. And so if you know, you know, and if you don't, go try this and see what results you get. But go to a place in the cemetery that you feel heart called to. And remember those coins that I had talked about earlier? You want to take 3 pennies. The pennies, copper being a conduit, you're going to take 3 of them. 3 is a very magical, powerful number with a lot of different correspondences and representations, depending on your own culture and background. You're going to throw those 3 pennies over your left shoulder. You're going to take a deep breath and you're going to turn around and you're going to go find where those pennies went. Now, you want to be mindful that there needs to be plots around the space that you are doing this in, because the intention is to find a dead friend, a familiar ally, if you will. The pennies that land on plots could be potential, okay? I'm not saying that they're 100% shoo-ins, but if you go with the idea of seeking help or seeking aid, if you have something heavy on your heart and you are looking for insight from the dead, and if you are looking for help in a working, you can throw those pennies out there behind you. Also, you could go without the intention of anything specific and just wanting to know who wants to talk to you. Sometimes necromancy is just having a conversation with the dead. Pennies that land on plots are spirits that then you can do further divination with in order to establish communication and see if this is a relationship that you are wanting to expand upon, explore, and connect with further. So like objects, right, that can be consecrated in a cemetery. And I talked about Cuthuns earlier, which are sort of magical objects that are connected with an essence of a person. And I had mentioned about how for a lot of us witches, our Book of Shadows could be like our Kuthun, or a necklace or a pendant that is worn often could be seen as a Kuthun. Think about a close friend of yours, and if they were to pass away tomorrow, what is something of theirs that you would want to have? And I don't mean you would want it from like a jealousy or an evil eye standpoint, like, oh, I wish I had her XYZ, but like, was there a coat or a jacket or a ring or a piece of jewelry, or was there a book that she really liked, or did she collect records? I mean, those things could also kind of serve as Cuthuns that could connect you with your loved one. And consecrating a Kuthun from across the veil is also possible as well by connecting it with that plot. You can also imbue and consecrate crystals, and I'm really not even a crystal girly, but the simple power of a clear quartz left overnight or for the entire lunar cycle of the moon in a cemetery can be a very powerful tool. There's also ghost water, which could be like having a water bottle that's left in the cemetery overnight and then brought home. And then you can use that water for divination, anointing, or other types of work. Allegedly, and for entertainment purposes only, one of the things that maybe I have or have not done is to actually weave and make witches' ladders with black chicken feathers in them and a certain number of knots that I have left at specific sites in order to build more of a connection, in order to weave together, if you will. I'll let you fill in the blank, and that is 100% for entertainment purposes only. And all of that is to say that there's also like cleansing yourself and closing things out. So however you cleanse, this video is not about cleansing. And I would assume that if we're pursuing necromancy, we already have a cleansing routine or a way to cleanse ourselves already established. If we do not, then maybe we should work on grounding, centering, and cleansing before we get into working with the dead. On your way out of the cemetery, you can also make an offering to the keeper as well, acknowledge them, thank them, and make your offering. And this is also a way to protect yourself and ensure that nothing follows you home. Because again, just like the living, the dead are not all saints. Some of them might just wish you harm for the hell of it. Okay, so as I had mentioned earlier, going back to the coins, you can also leave coins on top of graves as an offering. And I had mentioned earlier in this video that there's actually some lore surrounding this, and it does relate to the military. And I would be really interested if you live outside of North America, if you have anything similar to this, or if it's different and how so. I would love to hear about that down below. So leaving a penny means that you have visited the grave. And this also ties back to why we throw pennies over our left shoulder, because we are visitors. Nickels. Leaving a nickel indicates that you and the deceased person were in boot camp together. A dime. Leaving a dime signifies that you served with the deceased in some capacity. So traditionally that would be like the military. And then a quarter, leaving a quarter means that you were with the deceased when they died. There's a lot of Americans that use this in their craft, even though it is something that's kind of more popular with honoring veterans and is sort of more of a military practice. I think that we as American witches can also incorporate this into our practice by doing the things I just mentioned, like throwing those pennies over your shoulder or leaving specifically pennies at the grave of someone that you are building a connection with and that you are visiting with, because that has already been a thing and already been practiced by people long before you. If you are visiting a loved one that you were very close with in life, I think leaving a quarter would be very fitting as that sort of indicator that you're much more than just a visitor. So with all of that being said, I think this is going to wrap up this video. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this. I hope I was able to do this topic justice. I know that there are going to be things that while I'm editing this, I'm going to be like, damn, I wish I had mentioned that. And so maybe I'll include that in this video. Maybe I'll make a whole second video. Let me know if there is anything that I have talked about that you would like me to expand upon more. And if you have other topic suggestions relating to necromancy or death work or just witchcraft, please feel free to comment them down below. I would love some suggestions. I can't promise that I'm going to do it, but please feel free to suggest it and I will definitely consider it. As always, thank you so much for being here. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, you are very much appreciated. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you can be notified every time I upload. Make sure to check out all of my links down below so you can keep up with me on other social media platforms. And until next time, be well, be blessed, and blessed be, and I will see you in hell, witch. Bye.
Crooked finger bent with intent, sending confusion and chaos where meant. Evils arise in powers imbue. Do unto others as they've done to you. Call back the storm in the heart of a witch who's already been scorned. The demons whisper